Have you ever looked at the person you love and wondered, what happened to us? Marriage doesn't always fall apart through fights. It often breaks in the quiet, in the moments when the silence feels heavier than the truth. When love is still there, but exhaustion grows louder, you start thinking about leaving more than staying. This video is my own 2-week journey in the US, where I learned that sometimes marriage doesn't need miracles. It just needs two hearts willing to stay. The quiet break when love feels heavy. Imagine this. You're sitting at the kitchen table with someone you promised forever to, and the only thing louder than the silence is the sound of your own heartbeat trying to fill the gap. That was me last week in the US, staring at my coffee like it had the answers my marriage couldn't give me. It's funny, your brain can survive chaos, but a quiet room with unresolved emotions? That's psychological warfare. And marriage, well, marriage turns silence into an entire language you never studied for. People think relationships break because of big dramatic fights. No. Sometimes they break because two people stop speaking the tiny sentences that once held them together. Are you okay? I'm here. Let's figure it out. When those disappear, you start losing your fluency not just in English but in love. My therapist likes to call it emotional rust. I call it the moment you forget how to be gentle with the person who once felt like home. The thing is, your mind loves predictable scripts. Your heart, total chaos. And when those two argue, your tongue becomes a hostage. That's how I found myself fumbling through simple English phrases with my own spouse. Me. Someone who teaches people how to train your ears like a native. Tell me why I can confidently pronounce perseverance but struggle to say I miss you, without sounding like a malfunctioning robot. Science has a cute explanation. When you're stressed, your prefrontal cortex, the reasonable part of your brain, basically packs its bags and goes on vacation. Meanwhile, your limbic system shows up like, let me ruin your evening real quick. That's why couples say things they don't mean, or worse, say nothing at all. Silence feels safer, even though it quietly kills everything you're trying to protect. But here's the interesting part. Sometimes the heaviness isn't a sign of ending. Sometimes it's a sign that your love is asking for a deeper language, one you haven't learned yet. A new kind of listening, a slower rhythm, a softer tone, almost like learning a new accent of the heart. In those moments, I remind myself of something simple. Every marriage, like language learning, has plateaus. Those weird stages where nothing feels like progress and you think you're failing. But plateaus aren't failure, they're integration. Growth happening underground. Connection rewiring itself. Hope rehearsing quietly. So if your marriage feels heavy right now, maybe it's not breaking. Maybe it's bending so it can carry the weight of who you both are becoming. And honestly, that realization alone softened something inside me. Just enough to stay at the table, breathe, and whisper the one sentence love always understands. I'm still here. The storm inside. When marriage tests your heart. Here's something no one warns you about. Marriage doesn't fall apart in some dramatic explosion. It's more like weather, quiet, unpredictable, and occasionally rude. In the second week here in the US, I realized the real storm wasn't between me and my partner. It was inside me. And honestly, it felt like my emotions woke up one morning, chose violence, and refused to clock out. Picture this, you're trying to explain your feelings in English, slow, calm, collected, because you teach people to communicate clearly. And yet the moment your spouse asks, "What's wrong?" Your entire brain turns into a Windows computer from 1997. Frozen. Loud internal buzzing. A gentle burning smell. Nothing loads. Not even your basic emotional vocabulary. Your heart wants to scream, your mind wants to hide, and your mouth? Completely unreliable. The funny part is the human brain hates emotional uncertainty more than actual pain. Neuroscientists say we're wired to predict everything: tone, expression, intention. But when the person you love suddenly feels distant, invisible alarms go off. Your amygdala starts acting like a smoke detector that screams even when you're just making toast. So instead of love, you speak panic. Instead of clarity, you deliver confusion. It's messy. It's human. It's a little unfair. And then there's the part no one talks about, the shame. The quiet voice inside whispering, "Why can you handle work, deadlines, strangers, and a whole new country, but not your own feelings?" Marriage has a way of showing you the unresolved corners of yourself. It holds up a mirror you can't escape from. Sometimes that reflection is beautiful. Sometimes it's a chaos gremlin wearing your face point one evening, after a silly argument about absolutely nothing. A fork in the sink, I think? I stepped outside to breathe. The wind was cold, sharp, unkind. But something about that cold felt honest. Like the world was reminding me, storms aren't signs of failure. They're signs that something inside you is rearranging itself, trying to find a healthier place to land. So I tried something different. Instead of defending myself, I described what was happening inside me. Not in perfect English, not in perfect logic, just in simple, real sentences. I feel overwhelmed. I don't want to fight. I need a moment, but I'm not leaving. Tiny phrases. Soft ones. The kind of language love understands even when grammar doesn't cooperate. And strangely, the storm shifted. Not because we solved anything instantly, but because I finally stopped fighting myself. That's the real battle in marriage. Not you versus your partner, but you versus your own fear of being seen too clearly. If you're in that same emotional weather pattern, here's the truth. Storms don't come to destroy. They come to loosen what is too tight, reveal what's been ignored, and teach your heart a vocabulary you didn't know it needed. The words we never say. Learning the language of safety. There's a strange thing that happens in marriage. You can share a home, a bed, a life, yet still struggle to share the truth. Real truth. The kind that sits heavy behind your ribs and waits for a safe moment to come out. And in the 2 weeks here in the US, far from everything familiar, I realized something uncomfortable. Love doesn't break because of arguments. It breaks because of the sentences we swallow. Imagine trying to express something delicate, fear, insecurity, disappointment, while your brain is juggling two languages. The English you're practicing every day, and the emotional vocabulary you grew up with. Sometimes they don't line up. Sometimes what you want to say sounds too dramatic in one language and too weak in another. So you choose silence thinking it's safer. But silence is like dust. It settles on everything until the whole room feels heavy. Your nervous system is wired for survival, not romance. When your partner's tone shifts even slightly, your brain tries to decode it like it's some encrypted message. Are they upset? Are they tired? Did I say something wrong? And if you've carried old wounds into this relationship, unspoken fears, childhood patterns, past heartbreak, that decoding becomes even harder. Suddenly, everything feels like a test you didn't study for. But here's the lesson these past days forced me to face. Understanding your partner isn't just about listening. It's about making the small brave choice to say the quiet truths out loud. One night, after a whole day of feeling disconnected, I finally said it. I feel like I'm talking, but you're not hearing the part that matters. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't perfectly structured. Honestly, it wasn't even comfortable. But it was honest. And that honesty cracked something open. Not in a dramatic movie way, but in the gentle way a stiff window finally slides after years of being stuck. My partner admitted he had been overwhelmed too. Not with me, but with work, with change, with life shifting faster than he could catch up. And that was the moment we both realized. We were fighting ghosts, not each other. Our fears were louder than our voices. Science says the human brain calms down when it feels emotionally understood. Not agreed with. Not fixed. Just understood. And sometimes the simplest phrases create that safety. I'm here. I'm trying. I don't know what to say, but I care. Tiny sentences, but powerful ones. Marriage isn't strengthened by grand declarations. It grows in the small moments when one of you is brave enough to go first. To name the fear. To ask for clarity. To offer softness even when you feel fragile. And maybe that's what real communication is. Not perfect English, not flawless logic, but two imperfect humans choosing each other again in the middle of emotional noise. When silence feels safer, the psychology of distance. Here's something no wedding vow ever warns you about. In marriage, there will be days when silence feels easier than honesty. Not because you don't care, but because caring makes everything heavier. And during these 2 weeks in the US, I learned just how quickly silence can shapeshift, from a tiny pause to a thick wall you can't see through anymore. Picture this. You're sitting next to someone you love, someone you chose, someone who promised to hold your heart carefully. Yet the air between you feels like a hallway after everyone's gone home. You want to speak, but every sentence in your mind sounds too dramatic or too complicated. Your emotions don't fit neatly into a single language. Your thoughts feel too big in your chest but too small once they reach your lips. So you wait, and waiting becomes hiding. Your brain, by the way, hates uncertainty. Neuroscience literally shows that when you're unsure how someone feels, your amygdala, the panic department, lights up like a faulty alarm system. It starts whispering nonsense. He's pulling away. She's tired of you. You're not enough. Even when none of that is true, that's how emotional distance begins. Not with betrayal, not with cruelty, but with two people quietly misinterpreting each other. One night last week, I felt that distance more sharply than usual. He sat on one side of the couch scrolling through emails. I sat on the other pretending to read. Our legs weren't touching. Our breaths weren't matching. Our thoughts felt continents apart even though we were in the same room. And the worst part? We both noticed, but neither of us knew how to break the quiet without breaking something else. Here's the irony. Silence feels safer because you think it prevents conflict. But emotionally, silence is corrosive. The longer it lingers, the more your mind fills the gaps with fear, assumptions, and old stories that don't belong to the present moment. Research in relationship psychology calls this protective withdrawal. You pull back not to punish your partner, but to protect yourself from feeling misunderstood or rejected. But in doing so, you accidentally create the very loneliness you were trying to avoid. The turning point came when he finally said softly, "I don't know how to talk about what I'm feeling, but I don't want you to think I'm far away." 8 simple words. No poetry. No dramatic confession. But it was enough. Because in marriage, truth doesn't need to be perfectly expressed. It just needs to be spoken before fear fills the silence, so we talked. Slowly. Honestly. Awkwardly. Not with perfect English. Not with flawless expressions, but with real emotion. And that's when I understood. Closeness isn't the absence of silence. It's the willingness to break it. Sometimes love survives not because you're skilled at communication, but because you're brave enough to whisper, "Can we try again?" The moment we broke and chose each other again. There's a moment in every marriage, sometimes small, sometimes catastrophic, when something breaks. Not the relationship itself, but the illusion that love can run on autopilot. And for us, that moment arrived here in the US, in the middle of an ordinary afternoon that had no reason to become unforgettable. Except that it did. It started with something stupid. It always does. A misunderstanding about schedules. A tone that sounded sharper than intended. A sentence that felt like a judgment even though it wasn't meant to be one. You know those moments when suddenly every insecurity you thought you outgrew comes crawling back like uninvited guests? That was me. My voice cracked first. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough for him to sense that this wasn't about schedules anymore. And when he asked, "What's really wrong?" I felt this wave of fear rise in my throat. Because the real answer was messy, emotional, vulnerable. Not the kind of thing that makes you feel strong or put together. But something strange happens when your heart knows it's now or never. I told him the truth. Not the polished version, not the adult version, but the raw, trembling, imperfect truth. I feel like I'm holding everything together alone. The words hung there, heavier than I expected. He went still. Completely still. Not in anger. In recognition. Because marriage isn't just shared joy. It's shared exhaustion. Shared shadows. Shared fears that no one talks about until they spill over. Then something I didn't expect happened. He softened. Not with pity, not with defense, but with presence. "I didn't know you felt that way," he said. "I thought you were doing okay. I didn't want to add to your stress." It's wild how often love hides behind good intentions. Psychologists say conflict peaks not when two people stop loving each other, but when they start misreading each other's silence as lack of care. And that was exactly our trap. We weren't breaking apart because we didn't love each other. We were breaking because we loved each other quietly, too quietly for the other person to feel it. We sat there for a long time. No arguing. No blaming. Just two tired hearts trying to translate the kind of emotions that don't easily fit into English or any language. And somehow, in the middle of that fragile honesty, something shifted back into place. Not perfectly. Not magically. But enough. Enough to remind me that marriage doesn't heal in grand gestures. It heals in moments when one person finally says, "This is where it hurts," and the other replies, "Then this is where I'll stay." Love at its core isn't about avoiding breaks. It's about choosing each other again after the break happens. Learning to love slow, the science of staying. There's a quiet kind of love that doesn't show up in movies or novels. The kind that looks boring from the outside but feels like survival on the inside. And during these 2 weeks in the US, after everything we said, everything we misread, and everything we finally admitted, I learned something unexpectedly scientific. Staying in love is less about emotion and more about regulation. Yes, regulation. Not romantic, I know, but incredibly real. Your nervous system has only two main goals: keep you alive and keep you safe. It doesn't care about passion, chemistry, or perfectly phrased confessions. It cares about patterns. It watches your partner's face, tone, breathing, and even micro-expressions to decide one thing. Am I safe or should I protect myself? And here's the secret no one teaches before marriage. Sometimes the person you love most can accidentally trigger your survival mode. That's what happened to me one morning. He wasn't angry. He wasn't cold. He was just distracted. His voice came out flatter than usual. His replies were short. And my brain immediately assumed the worst. Old memories, old wounds, old narratives, all crashing into the present like they had a right to be there. But that's how emotional trauma works. It uses today's silence to replay yesterday's pain. So I did something I almost never do. I paused, took a breath, watched my own reaction instead of reacting to his. Neuroscientists call this interoception, the ability to notice your internal state before it hijacks your behavior. And in marriage, it's one of the most powerful forms of love. When he finally looked up from his screen and saw my face softened instead of tightened, something shifted. He put the laptop aside. He reached for my hand. "I'm here," he said in that quiet voice he uses when life feels heavier than usual. I didn't mean to disappear. There it was. The moment of reconnection. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just slow, human, intentional. Love is built in these microscopic choices. Choosing to breathe instead of accuse. Choosing curiosity over assumptions. Choosing to ask, "Are you okay?" instead of "What's wrong with you?" Think about it. Every strong relationship you admire isn't strong because the couple never fought. It's strong because they learned to return to each other faster each time they drifted apart. That's the real miracle. Not staying perfectly connected, but learning how to reconnect without destroying each other in the process. And maybe that's what adult love really is. Not constant passion, not endless ease, but the practice of slowing down enough to hear your partner's heart, even when you're scared. The kind of love that grows like steady light, not fireworks, soft, warm, persistent. If romance is the spark, healing is the oxygen. And staying is the skill. The soft return when love circles back. There's a moment after the fear settles and the sharp edges dull. When love quietly circles back. Not loudly, not triumphantly. More like a tired bird that somehow finds its way home after a storm. And in these 2 weeks in the US, that was the hardest lesson I had to relearn. Healing in marriage doesn't happen in one breakthrough conversation. It happens in the soft return that follows. The morning after our hardest night, nothing dramatic happened. No tearful reconciliation. No movie scene embrace. Instead, something small, almost invisible, shifted. He made coffee and placed my cup on the table the way he knows I like it. Handle turned toward my right hand. A tiny act of attention. A micro-apology made of routine and warmth. Psychologists call these repair attempts, little signals that say, "I still choose you," even when words haven't fully caught up. Most people overlook them. But in a relationship that's been through a storm, these gestures feel like breadcrumbs leading back to safety. Later that day, he asked, "Do you want to walk with me?" Simple question. But after days of emotional distance, it felt like an invitation back into his world, so we walked. Slowly. No agenda. No big talk. Just footsteps sinking again after being out of rhythm for too long. At one point our hands brushed, not intentionally, not symbolically, just naturally. But that tiny contact felt like confirmation that we were finding our way again. That here's the truth no self-help book tells you. Reconnection is rarely dramatic. Most of the time it looks like two people doing ordinary things with renewed softness. As we walked, I noticed how the late afternoon sun made everything look gentler. The sidewalks, the buildings, even the way he looked when he turned toward me. My brain, no longer in defense mode, could finally see him again. Not the version I feared, not the version I invented during our silence, but the real him. Flawed, tired, loving, trying. And that realization cracked something open in me. Healing in marriage isn't about perfection. It's about permission, the permission to be human, to try again, to soften without losing yourself. The permission to return without pretending the pain never existed. And the permission to let your partner return too. Even if you were hurt. It's funny how love grows stronger not because of big declarations, but because of tiny returns. The quiet, "Are you hungry?" The soft, "Sit with me." The gentle, "Let's rest." All these things say, "We're okay," long before the mind fully believes it. By the time we reached home, nothing huge had been resolved. And yet, everything had shifted. Sometimes love doesn't need a conclusion, it just needs space to breathe again. What love still needs. Sometimes love doesn't need grand gestures, it just needs one honest moment in the quiet space between two people. There are words that want to come out but stay hidden. Not because they are untrue, but because the heart hasn't yet decided how brave it wants to be. And in this 8th chapter of our journey, we step into that in-between world. The world where love is still learning how to speak. He sits beside her. Not too close, not too far. The evening light settles gently on both of them, drawing soft lines around their silhouettes. A silence stretches, warm but unsure, like a hand reaching out but not yet touching. He wonders if she can hear the thoughts running through him, the hesitations, the hopes, the little pieces of courage gathering like dust on a windowsill. Love, he realizes, doesn't always need answers. Sometimes, it just needs space to breathe. He turns slightly, just enough to notice the way she looks at the sky, as if the clouds are holding a message she's been waiting for. Maybe she doesn't know how to begin either. Maybe both of them are standing at the doorway of something real, something fragile, something still finding its shape. What does love still need from me? He wonders, and the answer rises quietly. Love needs truth, the kind that is soft, not sharp. Love needs patience, the kind that stays even when nothing is certain. Love needs presence, the kind that listens without rushing to fix the moment. And above all, love needs courage, the courage to be seen exactly as you are. He clears his throat, not to speak yet, but to steady himself. She glances at him, eyes questioning but gentle, inviting him to continue if he chooses to. In that tiny exchange, something shifts. A door opens. A possibility appears. He finally says, slow and careful, "There are things I haven't said. Not because I don't feel them, but because I wasn't sure how." She doesn't interrupt. She waits. and that waiting becomes the safest place he has ever known. Love, he thinks again, needs this. A moment without pressure, a moment where two hearts can meet halfway. He continues, I'm still learning how to show what I feel. I'm still learning what love needs from me. But I want to learn it with you. Her smile isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It's small, sincere, and full of the quiet yes he didn't know he was hoping for. And in that moment, he understands something important. Love doesn't need perfection. It only needs willingness. A willingness to stay to speak, to listen, to begin again. And sometimes that is enough.